Welcome to Post Doom, regenerative conversations exploring overshoot grief, grounding, and gratitude. I'm Michael Dowd, your host. And in this conversation, recorded in November of 2020, I speak with Gauthier Chapelle. Gutier is the co-author of a book that just is coming out in English this month, December of 2020, called Another End of the World is Possible. And he's an agricultural engineer. He has a PhD in biology. He's also written for Resilience. He's got a really great piece there called Deep Adaptation Opens Up a Necessary Conversation About the Breakdown of Civilization. You'll see that Gutier and I really hit it off. We discovered in the course of the conversation that we both share the same birth date, exactly 10 years apart. And I think you'll find him to be profoundly insightful and heartful and just an awesome guy. And I consider him now a sweet colleague in this space. Well, Gauthier, it is absolutely fabulous to have you as part of this post-Doom conversation series, because I am such a deep bow of respect to those of you in France that are doing this collapsology work, that are writing some of the most important things that I've read on the subject. I know you were engaged, although your name isn't listed as a co-author, but you were quite engaged in one of the books I consider one of the more important books on the subject, How Everything Can Collapse. And then, and I just read the manuscript that you sent me, Another End of the World is Possible, Live the Collapse and Don't Just Survive It. And so, I don't know, it's just a joy to have you as part of this series, and especially given the fact that we share so many mentors and friends and colleagues. And I just want to invite you at the start to just share, for those of us listening to this or watching this who may not be familiar with your work, they may not be familiar with what those of you in France are doing in this whole world of collapsology, which is a term that I now use quite regularly, even for myself. So introduce yourself, take your time, don't be bashful, but help us get you, help us have a sense of what you're passionate about, what you're committed to, what you're well known for, and then what brings you to this conversation.
Okay, thanks. Thank you first for inviting us. I feel a bit like the representative of our trio. And okay, so let's go into it. So the first thing I would like to say probably is that I'm a naturalist by passion, since I'm a kid basically, and that, I have to say, opened my mind and my attention to what was happening to the living world. Let's put it like this. One of the key moments for me was when I came to Brittany to live 1 year with my parents, and that was just 6 months after probably at that time the biggest oil spill that ever occurred in Europe. That was the Amoco Cadiz, if you remember so.
Yep.
And it was 6 months after, and literally we could still see the boat, what was left of the boat from the place where we were living. So obviously it had an impact on me. I was 10 years old at that time.
10 years old now.
Yep. Then I studied later on. I studied first. I trained as an agriculture engineer, and then I made a PhD in biology. And funnily enough, it's exactly the same thing that Pablo did. Pablo Servin, our co-author, did 10 years later, because he's 10 years younger than me. And during this thesis, I had the huge opportunity to go to Antarctica several times. And that was my second place of, let's say, consciousness, awareness rising. And specifically in 1988, when I ended up on a beach which was covered with plastic in Antarctica, which was rather impressive. And actually rather shocking. I mean, it made me cry. I was 19 years old at that time, and that was in 1988. So the amount of plastic in 88 was nothing compared to what it is now and to what it will be in 20 years' time.
What I've got to ask, what led you, or how did you? Was this involved in a university program that you were involved in? How did you get to go to Antarctica?
In fact, it was for my thesis. I was studying crustacean reproduction and then crustacean gigantism, which is common in polar regions. So it was for very, let's say, fundamental research, but I was ready to study whatever I could to go there
Yes.
as a naturalist, as you can imagine.
Yes.
But I was not prepared to that shock. I have to say that
Yes.
this was really something. And then in the next 10, 15 years, I went again to Antarctica. And the last time it was during the International Polar Year in 2007, to look at the effect of climate change on the benthos, so the bottom fauna, in the peninsula. And that was another shock, because we were navigating in an area that was ice-free for the first time for at least 40,000 years or something like this, which was strange in a way, because we could see a normal Antarctic scenery, but we knew that we had nothing to do there, except if without the role of climate change, it wouldn't have been possible. We would have a shelf of 300 meters depth instead of free water. So that was another of these moments. And that led me, at that time, I was working for a foundation, which was making education about, let's say, sustainable development, which was still a term at that time,
right.
and climate change. And when I came back from that expedition specifically, but also making more and more conferences, I was feeling increasingly desperate, because I could feel that whatever we were saying and doing, let's say the figures were not changing, and that we were still making things worse and worse.
Exactly.
And so that's the time where I really looked for a way to deal with these desperate feelings. And that's when I took, as we all do, we all have our series of books waiting on the shelf, and then suddenly it's the time to take one book out of the pile. And that was one book from Joanna Macy that I had for several years, and which gave me the clue. And so, the despair work. So I looked for workshops, and there was the first workshop in French in Belgium. I'm living in Belgium actually, coming to Belgium like 6 months after, which was a good chance. And to me, it was a revelation, especially the second part of the work, which is working on all the difficult emotions. So sadness, fear, despair, and what's my last one? Sadness, fear, and angst, which is maybe the most taboo. And so that opened really my heart. Let's say it like this, and also was very in continuity with my, let's say, inner voyage to the most sacred part of my relationship with life, which being a naturalist was a good preparation, but you can also be a naturalist and not being connected to the sacred dimension of life. And so that was coming at in these same years, let's say. And then we moved with Raphael Stevens, who is the third of the trio. That's when we met, before we met Pablo. And we discovered biomimicry, which was rising in the US thanks to Janine Benius at the time. So we're maybe 5 years later after her book. I discovered that at the Schumacher College, which is another amazing place, as you know, to discover these kind of things. And so together with Raphael, when I was back, we created an NGO, and then how do you say, un bureau d'études, a business, an office.
Like a nonprofit?
Yeah, no, actually a profit. So we created a nonprofit, and then a profit who is offering its services to businesses and to public.
Like a consulting business?
Yes, okay, that's it. The consulting company, sorry, offering these services, and based mostly on biomimicry. We did that for 8-9 years, and then again we had to come to acknowledge that actually whatever we were doing, us and many others, of course, that things were still not changing.
Yes.
And so that's when also we met Pablo, more or less at that time, and that we realized that we had very strong interests in common, one being around Mutual Aid. That's another book that we've
Yep.
written together, but which is not yet translated in English, but which will come probably next year.
Good. Glad to
And
hear that.
yes, and so mutual aid was one of our common topics, and collapse. That's
Yes.
when they developed the collapse theory with Raphael. While at the same time, I was writing a book about biomimicry, mainly to say that biomimicry was going into greenwashing, as the all
Yes.
previous and the following concepts that keep feeding capitalism. Well, yes, it's okay. Let's say coming to this point where we were writing about collapse was one thing, and then doing it was another one.
Mhm.
And I'm saying this because you insist on this emotional side, because in a way, it's when Raphael and Pablo wrote the first book that they went themselves through a whole emotional process.
Of course.
We were helped, and that's where we are not exactly, of course, the same, the three of us, but each of us was helped by more or less its own practice.
Mhm.
But one of the things we share with Pablo is both the work that reconnects, which Raphael also shares because he has spent 1 year in Schumacher College, whereas I've been only in short courses. And also, I mentioned it straight away, both Pablo and me, we've been through also Mankind Project initiation and more. And that helped us also a lot and made sense in a way to feel, to feel, I don't know how to say that, but to stand as humans, and specifically as men, of course, because we are men, in front of not only the perspective of the collapse, but also of what it drives inside you and inside our partners and friends and families and so on.
Yes.
Because as you know, it's also a whole process, especially when not everybody goes at the same speed.
Exactly.
But I guess
Exactly.
Karen Baker mentioned that.
I mean, you're 10 years younger than I am. I just turned 62 yesterday. But
Yesterday,
yes, yesterday.
I'm from the 19th.
Yeah, 19th.
Yeah, so do I.
So you turned 52 yesterday?
Yes.
That's
That's
too good.
amazing.
That's too good. Yeah, that's too great. Yeah. So so we've got exactly a decade between us, and yet I feel such a brother, a soul brother passion with you for these ideas. And so I just want you to both share your story, but also a little bit more about, you've mentioned Joanna Macy, of course, and Bill Kauth, but anybody else that you want to share in terms of mentors and colleagues that you find a closer relationship. So feel free to flesh that out a little bit more.
Okay, so maybe one thing I can add immediately, I mean, the person that comes to my mind immediately is Bill Plotkin. That's another one which for us is really big. And I say for us because, again, also Pablo certainly, maybe a bit less Raphael, but Bill Plotkin, and especially the book, to me, this foundational book in my perception is the one giving the 8 steps. It's a book one, the Bible.
Yes.
The big red book, as it seems to be known. And to me, one of the concepts also that we've put in our book, by the way, reflecting on him, is the question of patho-adolescence, as he said. He's telling that our Western society is a patho-adolescent society, which I have to say, unfortunately, I totally agree with. And in another little book, he wrote about the 3, let's say, symptoms of this, and that I want to mention straight ahead, really saying that it's not being, proud or whatever, but it's just a fact. And the 3 thing is that first, that we are we think that we will live forever,
Yep.
and both as is shown by transhumanism at a personal level, but as is shown that this civilization thinks that it's perfect and that it can live forever. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we want, like all teenagers, we want everything all the time on the spot immediately. which is fine when you are a teenager, but not anymore when you are
Yes,
a bit
exactly.
older. And then the third thing is that all the previous people are idiots who didn't understand anything. We know everything. And to me, I'm very sensitive to this question as a biomimeticist, whatever you say,
Mhm.
because of course biomimicry is exactly saying the opposite. Biomimicry is saying that our ancestors are our mentors, and our ancestors meaning back to the bacteria from 3.8 billion years ago. And this is to me also the link, by the way, between biomimicry, which has been an important part of my life for nearly 10 years, and which still is, by the way, at a lower level, but still is. Because biomimicry, I think, by offering what we call the life principles, offer us the guidelines to prevent the collapse if we had time, but we didn't do it, to go through the collapse and to reinvent something as you define it after the collapse if there are still humans to do it. And so these are other important, let's say, directions that I'm still following. Well, yeah, I mean, just getting back to this disconnection question, to me, it's another thing that we experienced with Bill Plotkin during another workshop in Schumacher College years later, together with my partners from the work that Reconnects, by the way. And that was around the shift we have to make from a relationship which considered us as the only subjects and all the other than humans, as we say, as objects. And with Bill and Janine, we really experienced, I mean, not just in theory, but going into the forest, what it is to build a relationship from subject to subject, which bring me, by the way, to this fact that you can be a naturalist and completely consider what you observe just as objects. And to me, it was a fantastic reconciliation to be able to do both. And that's another thing important maybe to mention. I've been living in Brussels, so in a town, for 30 years, and now I've moved for 2 years now outside in the countryside, but not just in the countryside, but with a river at the end of the garden and with the forest around, which maybe is something common in the US or easier to get, but I can tell you in Belgium, in one of the densest countries in the world, it's not that easy to have. And to me, it has just changed everything even one step further. And now when I'm discovering all these other inhabitants, I feel like each time, meeting other guys, or I don't know how to say.
Other beings.
Not just identifying them, but also naming them and honoring them. And by the way, at the same time, I want to honor somebody I'm reading right now that I'm sure you know, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass.
Oh, yes.
I can't remember
Robin Wall
the full name.
Kimmerer.
Yes, I think she would be great also in your series if she feels like.
Well, actually, I invited her. She said yes, and we just haven't scheduled it yet.
Yes. I find this book absolutely brilliant, and especially brilliant to give us, to give her all her insight as a botanist, as this amazing mix she is. I don't know if everybody knows her as a botanist. Amerindian, how to say,
she brings together Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass, indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the teachings of plants, I think is the subtitle.
And being a mother and a grandmother, completely being proud of it and using it to tell us a lot of things. And to me, it's kind of a recipe book to how to behave.
Yes, it is. It's the manner. It's the manners of how to behave in the living world.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, I was just a part of a Gaian discussion group that Eric Asadorian got started, and we've been discussing various books. One of them we discussed was actually a book with the same title as Pablo and Raphael's book, "Another End of the World is Possible," by John Halstead.
Actually, I found it.
Yes. But he and I led a discussion about that book and one other one, and then the next one just maybe 3 weeks ago we discussed Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, and so it's fresh on my mind. The other thing that I'll mention for anybody watching or listening to this is that Robin records it in her own voice. So the audiobook is narrated by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she reads with such native storytelling skill and pace. And I can't even tell you, it's 7-10 times at the end or near the end of a chapter, Connie and I were moved to tears listening to her reading her own book.
Yeah. Just reading it brought me to tears several times, I have to say. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Some of the parts I was saying, oh my God. And even, and I'm not native English speaker. I can imagine what it has to be for.
Yes.
When you really feel all the subtleties of the language. Yeah.
But anything you want to say about how this big picture perspective, that this epic of evolution, or big history, but not big history interpreted in a human-centered way, but the history of everyone and everything. How has that informed you? How does it inspire you? How have you found that helpful?
Yes, first I have to say that because I'm a biologist and a naturalist by heart more than by training, I'm really always referring to life, to the story of life more than the story of the universe, whereas I'm still also discovering the importance of putting that even in the bigger picture of the story of the universe. So I'm using this scale of let's say the birth of the earth. And so, then the life, if we refer to one calendar year, so life appears end of February and etc. And of course, our industrial civilization, so I go the whole calendar through, is the last second. And what I like with this realization is that, there are several conclusions you can take. The first being that we've been very efficient in 1 second. In 1 second, we've been very, very efficient to destroy a lot of things, not to destroy everything, but to destroy a lot of things. At the same time, you can also say if we are there only for, let's say, the industrial civilization, only for 1 second, it also means that we can correct a lot of things because it's just 1 second on the whole year. So
I wish I held that faith.
Maybe,
still I don't
anymore. But it doesn't mean that we won't have any crisis, because but life has been through crisis already. So I don't think for life it's an issue. Right. I'm always saying, okay, if we are already at the 6th extinction, it means there were 5 before and there will be more after.
Yes.
Not a big deal. For us, that's another story. Of course, for our civilization, it's doomed. But for the species, I'm still quite optimistic. But okay, let's first stick to your question. Another one, which is from biomimicry, is saying, okay, so we have to maybe turn on the right or turn on the left, or maybe go backwards a bit, which is not forbidden by anything. So we can go backwards, it's not a shame. We can do that, and before taking another direction. And to do that, we have mentors. And we have mentors which have been showing the way since end of Feb. That's a lot of time, whereas we are 1 second. And so that's the good part of it.
That's a great framing, because I haven't even used that when I tell the history of the universe. Life really begins at 72 on a 100-year time scale. So all the things related to Gaia or the biosphere or the ecosphere is from 72 to right now, midnight on December 31st of the 99th year. But I haven't thought to add that framing that you just offered, which is look at the teachers that we have that go back. So that's beautiful.
Yeah, and then at the same time, so that's maybe the cold analysis, but then also to me, it relating, it's like Thomas Berry does, is that if you feel too desperate about what is happening now, remember that we are part of a much bigger story, and even if it's not going to stop any suffering or whatever, but still we have not only this background of mentors, but also this wonderful family which is always showing us all the time how much life is powerful and how much life is fighting all the time. And fighting is not even a good word, because it's a bit military, but is always pushing to come back. And as soon as you lift the lid, they are there. The plants, exactly. The mushrooms, the bacteria, everything. And to me, the more, I mean, I think like many of us who are going through this collapse acceptance process, the more I look to the living world, even if it also gives me some suffering by feeling what is happening to them, but at the same time, it gives me also all the time, I'm one completely baffled by their power and their beauty and
Yes.
their abundance and their relationship and what they build together and how they can adapt and how they have adapted to anything. And even if I'm worried, I can tell you when I do that because it's behind my window. When I go into the forest, I have always these mixed feelings. I'm at the same time worried about what can happen because we can see it here as I guess in your place that the forest is suffering. We had
Yes.
3 years in a row with very, very low rain during summer
Yep.
and a lot of heat. But at the same time, I can also see, and I discuss it a lot with other biologists, how life is adapting already. And maybe it's going to be difficult because, as we know, this climate change that we are imposing is very, very fast compared to normal climate change, non-anthropogenic climate change. But still, I think some species will get through, and we will be again the species in trouble.
Yes, no, exactly. Well, earlier I meant to comment when you talked about relating to the living beings of the world as subjects in their own right. I'm reminded of one of my favorite quotes. Thomas Berry was my most significant male mentor. Well, he and William Catton, who wrote Overshoot. But Thomas Berry, since 1988, was a very significant influence for me. And he famously said, the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. And I know Daniel Wildcat, a Native American elder, says something similar, that we live among relatives, not resources. And that sense of relationality is just absolutely vital. It is heartbreaking also to have an awareness of all this, as you all do, and as I do, and Connie does. She's also a naturalist. In fact, she regularly cites Darwin and others who say that they're a naturalist first and a scientist second.
Absolutely.
But there can really be that heartbreak because you see the diminishment of life's diversity and complexity and fecundity, and yes, there's comfort in knowing that life will continue. Life has a way of doing that, no matter how bad the collapse. But still, when you've fallen in love with a forest, when you fall in love with trees, when you fall in love with a watershed, it's still heartbreaking when you see your beloved declining and knowing that the trajectory things are on does not look good.
Definitely. That's the reaction I have. Reading Robin Wall Kimmerer, it's because reading it from a European perspective, I guess, is probably quite different because we don't have our indigenous people around us anymore. They've been vanishing for maybe 2,000 years officially, and probably you can consider that some of the the peasant communities were still living in a very close proximity, but that's also more or less gone. And so in a way, going out of the city right now is important. I can feel how much for me, and also because it's a place we've chosen not for the other than humans, but also for the human community. That was also a driver to come at this very particular place. And as you just said, to me, it's difficult and heartbreaking to feel how much it's nourishing for me to now plant my roots here and know that maybe one day, if not me, maybe my son or my partner, who is much younger than me, will have to move because maybe conditions will become just not livable anymore. And that's a two-way realization. Finally getting indigenous to the place, that's great. And at the same time, we have to know and to acknowledge that for all of us now, we probably always have the possibility to move. But then you get back again to these ancestors of Robin Wall Kimmerer and others who have moved, who have been pushed by the Westerners all the time, and who have each time replanted their roots and recreated a relationship to the land. So
for about 10 years, Connie and I did public programs on a meaningful, inspiring, evidential interpretation. So a totally science-based understanding of the reality of impermanence and death, mortality, but then interpreting that in ways that are soul nourishing and emotionally inviting. And so that's my language. But just any ways that you think about mortality and death that you find helpful in this collapse context.
Yeah. Okay, so again, to me, there are a bit two sides. The first is the most analytical, and it's again something I completely realized when I was entering biomimicry, is that death is a life principle in itself. If you don't have death in an ecosystem, it just can't go on forever. And of course, that goes also with circularity. We know not only that death allows life, but that death is nourishing life.
Yes.
And to me, the best example, the most, I don't know, the most pedagogic example are trees. We know that when trees are living, that there's only the outer layer which is actually living. The whole trunk is dead cells. And then once they are dead, because there are so much animals, bacteria, fungi, and so on going inside to eat them, they become more alive than ever. And I find that, I love it. I really love it. So that's the analytical side. Then on my relationship to death myself, maybe first say that originally I have a Catholic background, but I should say my parents have a Catholic background, that they dropped quite early in my childhood. So although I have Catholic references, I was never really inside it, let's say. And actually, when I studied agricultural engineering, I had my scientist anti spirituality phase maybe for three, 4 years.
Sure.
And then I came back to it, and to me it's important to say I came back to it strangely enough with the dolphins. I've been close to cetaceans maybe for more than 10 years of my life, including some relationship with what we call ambassador dolphins, which are wild dolphins, usually solitary dolphins, that come to have relationship with people. And one of them especially was like a mentor for me, and it was to me a realization. It was my first contact with this subject-to-subject relationship with an animal, but even more than that, because I could feel him as a mentor.
Yes.
And as a spiritual mentor, by the way.
Yes.
And that's when it opened my mind. At the same time, I was also reading a lot of things about near-death experience. I had the opportunity to discuss it a bit with my grandma, who went through it several times. And also because when she died, actually, I was together with the rest of my family around her, and I was holding her hand when she was dying, which has been a tremendous experience.
How old were you?
I was 22, I think.
Okay.
And it completely changed my view of death by experience, which was absolutely such a present from life, from her, from everything.
Yes.
And now, even if I don't know how to name also what is this immanent force, or I mean, I don't have a lot of vocabulary to qualify that, but I know what I feel. And to me, it's just if we have a big conscious force which indeed fills the universe, and that every now and then incarnates itself in creatures, including us, but not just us.
Yes, exactly.
And which means also that I deeply feel and think that when we die, there's only one part of us which is dying. And that also, which is even more for me important for the collapse, means also that we didn't come now for any reason, that each of us has, like Bill Plotkin says, a special place in the world, how he defines the soul, which I completely resonate with, and which means that not only us, we came at a special time, but that brings also the question about kids, because I don't know how it is in the US, but I can tell you that in the French-speaking community, this question of kids in this a pre-collapse society is a real question, and more than a question. To me, it's even sometimes a drama. We know about more and more young girls who are how to say sterilizing,
Yes.
not to have kids because
Right.
they are afraid to have kids in this time, which I can understand that they
Right.
are afraid.
Exactly. Right.
But which is a very strong decision, and at the same time, it's their decision. I respect it
Yes.
in its essence, but it means to me that we still have a lot of things to say and of conditions to create to welcome all these people in their, in their U-shape phase, when they discover through us or through anything else the possibility of the collapse, to maybe do something else. And it's the opportunity for me to say that the three of us had a kid while we were, but you've read that part, while we were writing these books. So we don't live it the same way.
Yes. And I'm so grateful that you included that in the book, because I have both in my family experience. I have three children. My 37-year-old daughter is the mother of my 10-year-old granddaughter. My son is 35. He's just got married to a 31-year-old Colombian South American woman, and they've chosen to not have children. And he's fully collapse aware. And that's not the only reason, but they both want to be of service, but they don't feel called to have children. And he had a vasectomy so that he, can't have children. And my youngest daughter, who's 30, she and her husband, they got married 3 years ago, and a year and a half ago, they were contemplating getting pregnant. And I had a lot of anxiety around that, of bringing a child into the world, because all three of my children are collapse aware. They're not as immersed in it as I am and Connie and I are, but they're certainly aware. And I had a major breakthrough just a year and a half ago, where I was in Florida. I was with my nephew for a month, where my brother and sister-in-law went to England. And I had this flood of trust flew over me, where it just washed over me, where all of a sudden, all of the fear I had evaporated. And I thought to myself I thought, okay, what if, worst case scenario, this is the last generation of women to be able to have children? Would I really want my daughter to not have that experience, to have her and her husband have something larger than themselves to give to? And it was like this flood of trust. And so I cried and cried, and I called her up, and we both cried. And basically I said, whatever you all are led to do, I am a total, full-throated, big-hearted support of that. And then found out a month and a half later that literally 3 weeks after that conversation, they got pregnant. Now, to what degree she needed her old man's support, I have no idea, but it was amazing timing. And now, after 19 years of living on the road, Connie and I are settled 2 blocks from my 6-month-old granddaughter. And I spend an hour and a half to 2 hours, 5 days a week, caring for my granddaughter. And talk about having skin in the game and waking me up each day, excited to do something on behalf of the future. And when I'm with her, all the collapse and cares of the world just evaporate. There's just this divine being. And so I've got both my son choosing not to have children and having a vasectomy, and my youngest daughter choosing to have a child. And I've only become aware recently that there's a real debate within the collapse aware community, and not just a debate, some real judgment among, those who choose to not, sort of anti-natalists, or sometimes they're called, where they choose. I had one person attack me on the Reddit sub-collapse as being a pro-natalist. I had to look it up. I didn't know what he meant. And I was like, oh, because I say that I love my granddaughter, I'm a pro-natalist? Okay, well, guilty as accused, I guess. So I was really grateful that the three of you chose to include that in your book.
Yeah, and basically what we said, it was, we are not taking position. We were just talking about ourselves.
Correct.
And here I'm going to be very personal, because this is very personal indeed. I'm not going to talk for the two others. But what I feel is that, to me, the simple reason, so I have two grown-up kids which are 20 and 23, and then I have one kid now who is 3 years old, and to me the reason to have this kid was that he wanted to come, and that I was feeling the power of life again, and to me I was not going to stop this power of life, even if I was worried on the future, which I am, of course.
Yes, of course.
And so let's say that's to me the basic and nearly only reason to have one. And then I can think a bit further, and this gives further support, but it's not the motivation at all, is that if people who are aware about the collapse stop having kids, whereas only people who are unaware of the collapse still go on with having kids, I'm not sure it's the best deal we can offer to the earth. But again, it's not a reason to have.
No, exactly.
It's just right. Something I thought of afterwards. Yeah. And then also that's a self-realization, is that when you have kids, it gives you yourself an incredible power. And again, yes. You don't do kids to have power. Yes. That's not the reason, but it's just a fact. Again, I mean, if you have to fight for this world to be livable and pleasant, and as you said, as in the subtitle, not just to survive, but to live while having kids, it also doesn't break the chain of which starts not 300,000 years ago, but 3.8 billion years ago.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm still feeling part of this flow and of this chain, and I don't see why I would break it. But okay, people who don't want, it's fine, but I can't. I just can't.
Yeah, I think that there's a distinction that I make between doom and post-doom. Oftentimes, certainly for myself, when I was in doom, that's all I could see, I was still very much filled with fear and judgment. I had a lot of blame and judgment towards the fossil fuel companies and towards, the religion that's been asleep at the wheel and blah, 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 blah. And in a post-doom, the longer I've lived in what I call a post-doom heart and mind, the blame just sort of evaporates. I realized that these patterns, these human-centered, anthropocentric patterns, have been at work for thousands of years, that we are part of a lineage of boom and bust, progress and regress civilizations that are destined to collapse, that we're actually, if you start looking at the systems that we depend upon, we're actually decades already into collapse. So it's not a matter of will it happen. And so I find the blame goes, but the other thing that goes is the if only. If only everybody didn't fly. If only everybody became vegan. If only everybody stopped having children. If only everybody didn't have cars. That sense that it's almost sort of a panicked sense that if we just could get everybody to do this one good thing, and you can actually show statistically that would make a difference. And yet I think that we're all beyond that. So that's why I love this post-doom conversation, where I get to have conversations with colleagues who mostly live in that place of no longer playing the if-only game, no longer playing the blame game, and trying to live with as much compassion and generosity and love of life as possible in our various spheres of activity.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I have to say that although the if only game, this one I stopped for I'm not saying for a long time, but already for some years. The blaming game, I have to say that every now and then when some things comes up, I still have my, getting to it again, but having not only the world of Reconnect process, but also the community that
yes.
that goes around, and of course then going outside or playing with my kid,
yes.
can extinguish this feeling, let's say, faster and faster. But at the same time, I have to say, and to me that's another let's say lesson of Joanna Macy, is that it's fine if you have blaming time, as long as you don't do anything wrong with it, and if you can express it. And actually, I think it helps also people who are only getting into the doom, to have still people who are a bit further in their process still having their access of blaming, if it's in a ritual. I mean, the truth mandala,
yes.
If it's a ritual in a container with empathy and so on, that's fine. So
yes.
I've seen Joanna, by the way. I've seen Joanna I think that's the last time I saw her, actually the first and last time I saw her, the last time she came to Europe. And we had a truth mandala, 60 of us together, and she made a burst of angst in the middle of it. It was brilliant and such a relief for all of us. So we had a Mrs. Buddha, you know, in the
Yeah, Mrs. Buddha.
no, not at all. We had Joanna with her power and her roar.
Warrior herself. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yes, I'm glad that you added all that. That's perfect. That's great. Well, beginning to wind this down, I know that there are aspects of this book that you were particularly engaged with and have a real passion for. And you had mentioned those in an email. Anything that you would like to say about, you know, you've already said quite a bit, but any connection with other humans, ecofeminism, patriarchy, anything that you want to say about some of those aspects that you contributed to the book?
Yeah, well, I think this topic of patriarchy is to me very important, and again in two ways. Well, first, because I think that preparing this post-doom civilization, I'm not even sure I want to call it civilization anymore.
Yeah, I don't use the word
civilization. You have towns, and I think towns are part of the problems more than part of the solution. And I don't like the term solution either, by the way, so let's drop it.
Predicament. Right.
Yes. To me, what I want to say about that is that in all the fundamental things we have to change in our culture, more than in our stuff, but in our culture. So we've already talked about this subject to object, shifting to subject. That's a huge one. And to me, another huge one is the relationship, and here the words are difficult, between, let's say, what we call the masculine and the feminine. So not so much the men and women, but the masculine and the feminine, with this idea that all of us are how to say, have inside us archetypes from one side to another, with the whole gradient in between, with, again, the difficulty, especially with the youngest generation, to attributing some traits to masculine or others to feminine becomes sometimes tricky, and to me it's not so much important. But because many says it's only cultural, which I don't totally agree with, by the way, because I'm a biologist and I'm a father. More important, I'm a father, and I know some things that I've not been able to experience because I'm a father. I'm not a mother. I've not been realizing what it is to have somebody else in my own body saying, I'm doing what I want. And I've not been through, how to say, giving birth, obviously, and also then giving milk, suckling, suckling,
nursing,
and all of those things, which makes that a woman is not a man and a man is not a woman. But okay, let's not go too deep in this debate. My point is the same point as ecofeminism has been bringing up in a fantastic way, saying we have been torturing nature as we've done with women, and if we want to stop doing one, we have to stop doing both, and that goes into both directions. And I have to say that this, to me, is also huge because the work is huge. Because even if I have realized that for at least now 10 years in details, experiencing it as a man is still not easy. And I'm still fighting, for example, right now, to become, and I'm saying it loudly to persuade myself to still continue the job, to become a half-time father at home. So not just half-time father, that's easy, but also taking care of the whole, the whole part. We have a say in French, I don't know how it translates in English. We say the load, the moral load. No, mental load.
Start that again. I had a car drive past. It was really loud. Okay. Say that again.
We have a say in French, which is called the mental load. And the mental load, does it make sense in English?
Yeah.
The mental load is what women do in all modern couples. It's still the women which bear the mental load of having everything run at home, for example. And this is, to me, one of the good symptom and one of the sign of have we come to a real balance between men and women in a couple? There's another. I have a friend who's saying the test is easy. Who is cleaning the toilets? and it's a good one. And it's a good one. So just to say, but this is a bit. I mean, it's like a joke of saying this, but it goes much deeper than that. Indeed, for example, one of my latest realization on that was that even the way we write science, I mean, all the women that write science as men do, as men have invented. You know, when you know the common peer-reviewed paper with introduction, results, first materials and methods, and then results and so on. That's a very, very man way to write a paper.
Right.
And then when you go into some of these books of ecofeminism, you find them, weaving together poems and then more structured parts and so on. That's feminine way of writing, and they are so rare. They are still so rare, even in women. So I think there's a tremendous, path and exploration still to be made to get out of this patriarchy. Yeah. So that's one thing. And the other thing about patriarchy, which is a key for me, and that's a bit an obsession for me, I have to say, is that patriarchy has also built the hierarchical systems.
Hierarchical systems.
Which is a key for me. And it's a key for me as a biologist again, because there is no ecosystems functioning like this before the big cities, when they emerge in the Fertile Crescent.
Before we started mining metals.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. By the way, I have to mention another book that has just been translated from German. He is the French version, The End of the Mega Machine. I don't know if you've seen it in English, because it's just out in English now. You have to read that absolutely.
Okay, The End of the Mega Machine, right?
Yes, Fabian Scheidler.
Okay.
I'm thinking about it because he speaks a lot about just what you said about how metal has put everything is a cause and a consequence of hierarchy pyramids. And I think I have another friend who is a physician, in physics, a physics specialist, who says if you have a number of dots, and you want to connect the dots with the
greatest efficiency.
The smaller number of links, you got a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And that means that it's the most stupid system, because there's the less redundancy. And to us, the important fact is that when you have a big hierarchy like this, if you get a shock, because you lack redundancy, because you are waiting for a reaction from the top. First, the information has to get to the top and is simplified in the process, and then they take the decision, and then it goes down. And that's very slow, very inefficient, and for shocks, it's completely inefficient. And that's probably why you don't have forests functioning like this. Right. Because if they have tried, they've been wiped out. That's a theory. Huh? It's not a not a fact, but it's a fact that all forests and all coral reefs and all ecosystems function with interconnection, but not that way, not in a hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly. I think the biggest influence for me in that regard was Andrew Bard Schmuckler's book, The Parable of the Tribes. And that whole notion, I don't know if that was ever translated into French, but it was, this whole idea that once you have a domination, hierarchically organized culture mining metals, there becomes this almost an evolutionary arms race that you have to either develop that kind of mindset to protect yourself, and it kind of eventuates in the world that we now have, which is ultimately unsustainable and self-destructive. But it's almost like we had to go through this on my time scale of the last day. If you imagine a 24-hour period being the whole of human history, in terms of Homo sapiens, it's only the last half hour that we've had this kind of an arrangement. And what will, should any human being survive this bottleneck, which I think there's a fairly decent chance of that happening, natural selection shows us that it will only be those indigenous or indigenous cultures that can live in a reciprocal way with the living world that will likely continue into the future, especially given the fact that so much of the world is likely to be uninhabitable. So we won't have globalization cultures dominating the entire world because we won't have fossil fuels to travel, and much of the world will be uninhabitable. So. Wow. Well, last question before anything else that you want to say to be complete, but what for you has opened up? Like what would you say is the gift or the gifts that have opened up for you in fully embracing this collapse awareness, this collapse understanding?
Well, actually, to me, and I can say, because I know it for a number of people, the word that comes to my mind is relief. It's a relief. It's a relief in the sense, mainly in the sense that stop fighting to try to keep this kind of civilization running and trying to make it compatible with the rest of the world, because it's not just possible.
Yes, exactly.
By essence, it's not possible. We're always saying that the collapse, coming collapse is two sides. There's the collapse of the civilization, and then there are the collapse or the collapses on both sides of the Earth systems. And very clearly, the sooner we have the civilization collapses, the better for the Earth systems. And if we try to keep this system running longer and longer and longer, then the shock will be even harder in a way. So that's a relief to see it coming. And I have to say, it's a bit strange to say, but sometimes I wish it could come earlier, not so much because I want to see all these, it's going to be tricky, it's going to be difficult, but the more we wait, the more difficult it will be. So in a way, let's make it happen in a way, or at least let's not stop it from happening. So that's one relief. The other relief is that it gives me the taste. I mean, life is even tastier since, for sure, since I'm in the post-gloom phase. And I have to say that I'm myself still very optimistic about, I don't see near-term extinction of the human species. Simply, well, first, you gave many reasons just before, but also I'm always saying that to go from 7 billion to 0, that's a hell of a lot of a job. And to go, even if we were going to 1/10, which is still 700 million, and 700 million in my reference as a Belgian is still 70 Belgiums, and that's still a lot of people, even if they will probably spread all over the world, and as you said, only on the habitable part. But also this, as a biologist, I know that Greenland was flourishing with crocodiles and palm trees, and that even if indeed some parts will become uninhabitable, other parts will become habitable, although not in 5 seconds.
Yes, exactly.
We still have a little ice cap covering Greenland, but in the long term, yeah, I think that the people who will go through the first phase, maybe not exactly the first 10 years, but let's say the first 50 years, will, in my view, and that's also a very strong view we share together with Pablo and Rafael, and we put it in the book based on the mutual aid that we've also studied, is that all life, not just humans, is full of examples that the more troubles you have, the more mutual aid reinforces itself. Yeah. And I think we will have that with human communities. We see it with COVID. COVID has a lot of let's say, bad sides, but some of the good sides is that it has shown how much mutual aid has been working, and sometimes much faster than these big hierarchical systems that couldn't do anything really clever in time.
Yes, exactly. Wow. Well, let me just offer one thing that I wanted to get your perspective on, is that it seems to me that the language of that we are in a climate emergency, that things are dire, that we're at risk of civilization. All those seem to me to presuppose that it's about the future. And if we hold that, first of all, it gives, in my opinion, unrealistic hope. But the main thing that it does that's negative is that we don't attend to the things that we really should attend to if we know that there are going to be breakdowns in the power systems and civilization, which I see as three main things that is our sacred responsibility. It's a moral requirement for us to not be evil on a geological time scale. I mean, I'd phrase it that strongly. One is to ensure as few nuclear meltdowns as possible. As few nuclear accidents, as few nuclear meltdowns, to case, cap, whatever, take those fuel rods out of the swimming pools and put them somewhere safer. But the nuclear question, we need to attend to not as if civilization is going to have eternal life, but that it's going to collapse, and it's already collapsing. And so we need to ensure that we are not evil for the next 5 million years. That's one. The second is that thousands of species of native plants, trees, and shrubs will go extinct this century if humans don't assist them in migrating faster than any other animal can move their seeds. So that assisting migration of trees, shrubs, and plants is something that only humans can do. And again, that's holy work, even if we go extinct this century, because we help to ensure the maximum number of plant species, which of course the animals are dependent upon. And the third is, of course, just everything regenerative, to invest time and energy in anything and everything, agroecology, permaculture, whatever, but all things regenerative at any scale. And I think we won't attend to those three things if we hold out hope that civilization, industrial civilization, can continue. So that's sort of my, those are my preaching points these days.
Well, yeah, I can react to all of them because they all are touching me somewhere. Yeah, I have to say also, in your question, there was something else I wanted first to say, is that yes, indeed, we are entering collapse already. So this sentence or mantra, we have still a 10 years window. We've been saying that for 40 years, and I'm really fed up with this mantra. So let's face it. Okay, we are coming into it. But then also, to me, what is really important is to, especially in the collapse community, we have to imagine that there's a lot of good sides about it. And I'm going again to take maybe something a bit easy, but never mind. If you don't have the TV anymore or the internet anymore, which is a bit more difficult to conceive at that time of history, having a party around a campfire, first, it's an old story, but it's also something that everybody loves it.
Exactly.
And having building nice relationship with your neighboring, a bit like Bill Coase is doing with the how does he call it, the gift communities or whatever the name, is exactly not only what we need to go through collapse, but what we need to thrive,
to be human,
happy, and to be happy and to enjoy life. So that's one thing I wanted to say first, that we have to present, and especially when we talk about this with kids, by the way, with kids and teenagers, we have to say that not everything is going to be bad, and actually let's enjoy it already. I mean, we have been doing, for example, these last 2 years, Work That Reconnects workshops, which were not purely workshops, which were more tribe times with kids. With young kids.
Yes.
And of course, we were not talking about collapse. We were just talking collapse between grown-ups.
Exactly.
But at the same time, we were living as a tribe on a nice piece of land during a week. And this gives them the taste of it, even without knowing it.
Exactly.
And then they will be ready, not ready because we will have given them instructions, but they will be ready to enjoy it. Yes. So to me, that's an important part. Now, going to your three points. Nuclear, you probably don't know how much it resonates for Belgians, because right now the highest density of nuclear plants in the world is more or less centered on Belgium. And one of the most dangerous plants, because of its situation, is in the north of Belgium on the shore of an estuary, which is a nightmare, because it means that if you have at the same time a storm, the rising sea, and the high tide, I mean more than usual high tide, you have the perfect conditions just to sink it. And then you have Seveso, Seveso site. Seveso is the name of an industrial disaster that occurred in Italy.
Chernobyl?
The 70s. No, Seveso. Seveso. It was with dioxine. And it gave rise to a whole laws structure in Europe, where you have to declare all industry that are really dangerous. And near this nuclear plant I'm mentioning, there's one of the big Seveso sites. So if you had the two exploding together, that would probably sterilize quite a surface, and implied, probably, it seems, if you take the radius of Fukushima, the highest number of people ever, because you have Antwerpen, which is a 1.5 million town, and then you have Amsterdam, and then you have Rotterdam. So that's, and Maastricht, and I mean, that's a lot of people. So we feel very concerned by this question, and also very, let's say, again, we've been taught a lot about this topic by Joanna
Yes.
Macy, who
Yes.
started her whole process with this. And it's true that even if we haven't done it so far, we are talking every now and then in our community about how we can become the stewards of this place. And there's one which is literally 20 kilometers away from here, where we could stop them. I have to say that in Belgium, the nuclear program is about to stop in the next 10 years' time if they don't try to push it further again, as they've done already once. But still, the nuclear rods will still be there. And
Right.
so we will need stewards for a lot of time to say, don't touch this. And it's even a place, as Joanna has proposed, to teach other generations how crazy we were, and how wise we should be of just letting things like that. So that's one point. I totally agree with this. It's a huge question. The second is about the sixth extinction and assisted migration, and for this, I'm still trying to grasp the problem, because when I discuss it with some people working in forests here, some of them are still saying, well, right now, let things evolve by themselves. But that implies to have completely different scheme of forestry, of course, because forestry right now is very, trying to make things fast, and one species and so on. And so that's a disaster for what.
Well, just so you know, in North America, it's the foresters that are actually leading the assisted migration move, because they've got a financial investment in making sure that the trees that they plant are going to be able to grow in 20 or 30, 40 years. And so they're already all about taking other species from further south. It's the conservation biologists that have been more dragging their feet. Now, a major book that just came out called The Journeys of Trees, a story about people, forests, and the future. W.W. Norton is the publisher in English, The Journeys of Trees by Zach St. George. And it features my wife, Connie, from the very first sentence throughout the entire book, because she's majorly involved as a voice in this assisted migration.
Excellent. Well, actually, I would be very interested to have a chat with her about that, because here it's still, well, I mean, I know also that there are forest manager people who are already going into this direction, but it's still debated about how to do it to make it sounds as natural as possible, including bringing together the community of fungi and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And some are still counting on the plasticity of the whole community to maybe do something else. And then the third is regenerative systems and regenerative ecosystem. And that is for sure. And we are, as you know, we are very strongly pushing. I mean, the two of the three of us are agriculture engineers. We've been involved a lot with the permaculture movement, and one of the key things that we've been defending in our very first book that you probably don't know of is about bringing trees back into agriculture. And so we have to just plant trees everywhere. Also,
Yeah.
because trees, they don't grow in 5 minutes. And if you want trees to protect you in 15 years time, you better plant them now.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, that's the theory. In practice, I have to say that again, agriculture in Europe is a nightmare.
Yes.
How it is supported by the EC, by the way, to remain industrial. And although there's a very strong push by the people, and that's how it transforms, by the way, is because people are asking for something else. But the support of the big support of the EC is really still not there, although we're still waiting for it.
Yeah. That's great. Well, Gauthier, this has been so fabulous. Anything that you'd like to say to bring this conversation to completion?
Well, first, to me, there's a paradox. I mean, I'm really happy that we could do that. I'm really happy to join this community in a way. I also think it would be really nice to have Pablo, because Pablo is really the one of the trio who is completely in the spotlight, and so he has also I would say a lot more different things to say. Also because Pablo is in the south of France, whereas we are in Belgium, so it's also another point of view that he could bring. He is half Colombian, by the way. I don't know if you know that.
Okay, yeah.
So he has
and how is his English?
His English is maybe not as good as mine, which is not good either. But we went together to London to have some conferences with Jem Bendel and Rupert Reed. So I think I mean,
I'll reach out to him again.
Do it, yes, and I can encourage him to do it.
That's great.
Where the paradox is for me is that this community is alive right now because we have the internet and because we still have the power running in our computers. And I think we have also to prepare not only to accept that this community at some point will dilute, but also, and to me, it's also one thing I'm preparing a lot. I'm saying to my grown-up kids all the time, start to live without computers so that you don't miss them too much once they are connectable only 2 hours a day and maybe not connected to the web anymore.
Amen.
Okay, and so let's prepare everything. Let's have also, one of the first thing we did when we had our first collapse meeting between friends was to take our postal address again, because none of us knew where the others were living.
Yes.
And if suddenly we don't have any phones anymore, then how do I find the others? And so that's maybe also a good advice for all of us.
For more information about this project, go to postdoom.com.